Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit for February. And the February limited edition kits had a lot of papers from the 49 and Market Vintage Artistry Naturalist collection, and this is one of the beautiful papers that you see here. I love this paper because it was on the darker side, and so I thought that I would use some hexagons and I would punch them out of some lighter colored pattern paper, which I'm going to do in a little bit. But first I punched out some hexagons and I did that from some white paper so that I could kind of figure out where I wanted to place all of them on the layout. So I was thinking that I would use two different sizes, the largest size that I have and the smallest size, and these punches were made by Fiskars. Once I figured out how many hexagons I needed, I punched them out of some pattern paper that was in the kit, and I'm adding some modeling paste through the stencil that was also in the kit. I want to add some texture to these pieces. I'm not covering the whole hexagon in most cases. I'm trying to just add a few flowers, a little bit of texture to each one of them, but not cover the whole thing. And I continue adding this modeling paste. This is Liquitex modeling paste through the stencil to each one of the hexagons with a little bit more modeling paste on some and a little bit less on others. Some of the pieces had some pretty designs on them and I didn't want to cover them up, so I put less modeling paste on those hexagons. I also punched some very small hexagons out of red paper. You could see on the upper right hand corner I used one of the layering pieces that was included in the kit and I punched those out, and then I inked the edges of each of those hexagons with the black soot distress oxide using a dauber. So now I'm going to attach all of the pattern paper shapes to the white cardstock ones that I had cut out. This makes the pattern paper shapes sturdier and it also adds a little bit of dimension to them. In addition to the pattern paper, I punched some shapes out of the packaging that was in the ephemera pack. That's the green striped paper that you see on the layout now. I liked the way the packaging was a very light colored green, so it still stood out against the background. And now with the green shapes, I don't have all of the hexagons cut out from the exact same pattern paper. And then I decide where I want to put each of those hexagons that has been punched out. And now I'm attaching the larger hexagons to the white cardstock. And now there are two layers, so I ink the edges again because I want to make sure that that white cardstock has some black soot on the edges. And I continue doing the same thing to each of the hexagons. I attach the pattern paper to the white cardstock, I ink the edges, and then I place it back down on the layout. And I had a photo in mind, but I hadn't retrieved it yet, so I decided that I would just use that white circle that you see on the left hand side. That's for now just representing my photo. So I'm making sure that all of those shapes are lined up and exactly the way I want them, and then I start attaching them down to the layout. I'm trying to be careful to leave the same amount of space between each of the shapes. And the ATG adhesive is repositionable, so in case I make a mistake, it's not too hard to lift up the hexagon and then move it a little bit. As I was working on the layout, I was thinking that it would look better if there were just a couple of hexagons in the lower left-hand corner. I had a few hexagons left over from when I was creating the rest of the layout, so I used those, and I didn't have quite enough, so I grabbed my hexagon punch and the packaging that I had been using, and I punched out a striped green shape for the bottom of the layout. And then I do the same thing that I did on the rest of the layout. I layered up a pattern paper with a white cardstock hexagon, and then I inked the edges and attached all those shapes down to the layout. And then I was thinking that on the lower right-hand corner, it looked a little incomplete, so I used some scraps of hexagons that I'd already created, and I added another small piece to the right-hand side. Then using my scissors, I trimmed away all of the excess. And sometimes I do this with my scissors, sometimes I use my trimmer. For some reason, I just decided to use my scissors in this particular case. And then when I flipped over the paper, I realized I had not attached down those small red hexagons to the lower cluster. So this is going to be my photo. This is a photo of a squirrel that was on our porch. And the reason that I wanted to document this and the reason that I took a picture of the squirrel is not that squirrels are so unusual in our area, but when we didn't have dogs, we had quite a number of little creatures that used to come onto our porch. And I recently scrapbooked a photo of a chipmunk, and we also had a whole bunch of squirrels. There was probably about 6 months when we didn't have any dogs in our house. So a lot of these little critters got very comfortable. We would sometimes give them some snacks, which encouraged them even more so to come up on the porch. And this was one of the squirrels. There were some regulars that used to come up, and I just wanted to document that time in our lives when we didn't have dogs and we had some other animal friends in our lives. I used my Creative Memory circle cutters and I cut out the photo of the squirrel, and then I cut a small white border to go around the photo. I wanted to pop the photo up, give it a little bit of dimension, so I used some fun foam and I cut it in a circle and I put that behind the photo. I also inked the edges with some of the black soot distress oxide, and then I decided that I was going to use this title that was in the ephemera pack. It says "Life is for Living," and I was thinking that for this layout, any of the sentiments that I put on it were kind of from the squirrel's point of view. So I used the "Life is for Living" for the title, but then I also added some sentiments that say the wild side and seek and find, discover, stay curious, all things that I think apply to this little squirrel. And I popped the title up on the fun foam as well. And then I wasn't sure if I wanted to include these flowers on the layout. I did end up using them, but for some reason I couldn't decide whether I wanted to use them or not. I really like the flower that's to the right-hand side of the photo, and that does make it onto the final layout. I ended up using some smaller flowers by the title, and I think that the smaller flowers end up looking better, but you'll see those in a little bit. I use the Distress Oxide to ink the edges of all of those little sentiments that I'm placing on top of the hexagons. I added another small red hexagon to the bottom cluster. I just thought that that made it look a little bit more balanced. I moved a fussy cut butterfly, the one that I'm holding right now. I moved that up to the top right-hand side of the layout. I inked that as well. And then I used one of the die cuts from the punch-out sheets, and I placed that underneath the photo on the left. I just love the way that hanging plant, I don't know what it's called, but I love the way that that looks. And on another layout, I had used some distress ink to ink the edges of some of the leaves that come with these dimensional flowers. So I thought I would try inking the edges of these flowers. So I used some of the black soot, and I liked the way that that looked. I thought that it not only made the leaves look more vintage, but it also made them go together with everything else on the layout. I added just a little bit of fun foam to each of those sentiments, and that helps give them a little bit of dimension and makes them a little bit more noticeable. I also wanted to pop up the butterfly a little bit, so this is something that I love to do so that just the wings are popped up. I just put some adhesive down the center of the butterfly. I put a strip of foam on each wing, and then I put some adhesive on that foam, and then I pressed down on the center, and then the wings seem to pop up a little bit. I added one more sentiment, and it says the wild side. I'm attaching that down to the layout now. And then I was thinking that I wanted to draw a little bit more attention to the photo by putting some red paper behind it. So I used this journaling card, and the journaling card was just a tiny bit too small. So I have to piece the paper together. and that ended up working out just fine, and I don't think it's noticeable at all that it had to be pieced together. But I did add a little bit of Scotch tape just to reinforce the joint where those two pieces of paper come together, and then I inked the edges using, again, the Black Soot Distress Oxide. Now I've already popped up the photo on some foam, and I just left the foam. I kind of like the way it looked with the photo popped up on the foam and then the red behind the photo. But then I was also thinking that I might need that red paper on another layout, and there's no reason to waste the paper, so I cut a circle out from behind where the photo's going, and I did use that on another layout. I put some adhesive behind the photo, and then I put it back on the layout. And then as I was putting the photo back on the layout, I was thinking that I wanted to switch two of the hexagons. I wanted to put the hexagon that had the butterfly on it on the bottom where it would be more noticeable. I don't end up using these, but I added some floral die cuts to the layout, and I added some pearls to them. Now I'm adding some of these small green flowers to the layout, and then as I had mentioned, I like the idea of inking the edges. For now, I have removed the flowers that I had next to the photo, and I am putting some of the very small flowers on some of the hexagons. I do think that the layout looks better with the flowers to the right of the photo, so I do end up putting that back on again. I added a few more fussy cut butterflies to the layout, and I'm mainly putting those butterflies right near the flowers that I just added. And once again, I'm adding some foam to their wings so that they'll be a little more dimensional. The two that are on the lower half of the layout, those are actually from the punch out sheet. And then after I have all the butterflies attached down, I added some very tiny pearls to their centers. These are adhesive strips of 3mm pearls, and depending on the size of the butterfly, I add 2, 3, or 4 pearls to the butterflies. And I just love the finishing detail that this gives to butterflies. The large butterfly on the upper right-hand corner, that got 5 pearls. And then while I had the strips of pearls out, I was thinking that they would look nice if I added them around the edge of the photo. And again, I think that this is a nice finishing touch. Now, even though these pearls stick rather well, when I put them in a circle, they don't stick quite as well. So I did go back and add some gel glue, and that really helped keep the pearls in place. As I had mentioned, I added some floral die cuts, but I really didn't like the ones that I had because they were so light in color and so thin that they weren't even really noticeable on the layout. So I decided to use a different die. This is an Alinacutle cutting die. I got this from Tesla Crafts, and I cut some leaves out of some pattern paper. And then I used 2 different colors of Distress Oxide. I used Squeezed Lemonade and Fossilized Amber. And I think that the yellow will show up a lot better on this layout. I rearranged a couple of the embellishments on the upper left-hand corner. And then I started to scatter those leaves around the layout. I know that I don't need too many of them, but I did want to add this pop of yellow in a couple of areas on the layout. I decided that I wanted to add this butterfly to the photo, or to the edge of the photo, and I thought that would draw a little bit more attention to it. So here I am, as usual, popping up the butterfly, but I only had to pop up one wing because the other one was resting on the photo. I go back to each of those leaf die cuts, and I'm adding some more of the fossilized amber just to the edges of the leaves. I wanted them to have a little bit more variation of color, so I thought that that would help a little bit with them not just looking like a solid yellow. And I liked the slightly darker yellow on the edges of all of the leaves, but I wanted there to be even more contrast. So I decided to use some Distress ink in Vintage Photo, and I'm inking just the edges of the leaves. I just wanted them to have a little bit more character. And then as I finish inking them, I just tuck them right back where they were. And now I'm adding that flower back in on the right of the photo. I just thought it looked empty without it. And it's not just one flower, it actually has some buds and some leaves attached to it as well. And I used some heavy duty gel medium to attach that down. And then I also added another flower down by the title. That was a small flower. And now I'm using some watered down white acrylic paint and just adding a few splatters to the background. And I covered up my photo with some plastic, and then I took the plastic off to get in a few other places that were covered up by the plastic, and then I never put it back on again. But luckily I didn't get any of the splatters on the photo. And although the splatters do scatter around quite a bit, I am trying to keep them near the hexagons and the florals that are around the hexagons. And that's the last touch, and that completes this layout. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. Please take a look in the description box. If you're interested in finding out more about the My Creative Scrapbook kits, you can head on over to their website. They have so many beautiful kits available. And then I also wanted to say I have finally caught up on all of your amazingly wonderful comments. Thank you so much for leaving them, everybody. I really appreciate it. Have a really fantastic day. I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.